Ugh, video games were a waste of money. Now to go online and bid $1,000 for itchy and scratchy corncob holders. A terrific, terrific expense.
What's up guys, I'm Drew from Punch Punch Magic, and I'm here doing another Obscurity review for a game that a lot of you guys might not consider that obscure. That's right, you can probably tell by this video's cold open that I'm looking at the Simpsons Hit and Run, which I'll probably have a better image of the cover right here. Now, like I said, I know most people wouldn't consider this game obscure. In fact, a lot of people would say that it's actually pretty popular, and I will admit, in the past couple of weeks, this game's actually seen kind of a resurgence in popularity. I've seen it come up in a couple of Reddit threads. I've actually seen posts of it on like r/gaming. But either way, it's not obscure in the sense that it was obscure when it first came out. In fact, the whole point of the show isn't to look at games that were necessarily obscure when they first released. It's looking at games that were great when they first released that have since kind of fallen out of the public discussion. Games that have kind of become more obscure over time. And considering that this is one of the best licensed games ever made, in my opinion, it kind of sucks that nobody really talks about it anymore. Well, at least before I started making this video. So yeah, I know this isn't the most unheard of game, but gamers today, especially ones born after the 2000s, which is really weird to think about, but people born after the year 2000 aren't really going to know about this game, and they honestly probably don't care that much about The Simpsons, but they're seriously missing out on a really, really good licensed game. So with all that said, I'm going to start my coverage by going straight into the gameplay.
It's time to save Springfield! By car! By foot! By the seat of your pants!
When's this going to start?
Oh, that's so fun it should be a felony.
2003 was a big year for open world games. Rockstar had already established themselves as the kings of the open world action game with Grand Theft Auto 3 in 2001 and Grand Theft Auto Vice City in 2002. They were living large as one of the most popular franchises in gaming, as well as one of the most controversial. Even with all of that controversy though, GTA still consistently sold millions. This meant that basically every single publisher was doing everything in their power to dethrone them. Activision released both True Crime Streets of LA and Tony Hawk's Underground in 2003 to try and get their own piece of the open world pie. Sony released The Getaway, an open world British gang game that I've honestly never played, and EA released Need for Speed Underground, which was the series' first semi-open world entry. The Grand Theft Auto clone genre was starting to grow at an alarming rate, and yes, Grand Theft Auto clone was coined so much back in these days that it was actually classified as its own genre. It even has its own Wikipedia page, for goodness sake. So with all of these different studios and publishers throwing their hat into the open world ring, Vivendi Games decided they wanted in as well. One of their studios, Radical Games, was hard at work on a sequel to their surprising licensed hit, The Simpsons Road Rage. This was a game that borrowed a lot from the Crazy Taxi series, where various members of the Simpsons family were tasked with escorting familiar faces around Springfield. When starting the game's sequel, however, Vivendi and Radical decided to shift the game's gameplay to something that was a little bit more open and contemporary. And thus, The Simpsons Hit and Run was born. Hit and Run adopted a playstyle that is very familiar to gamers today. Players were free to roam around an open environment and complete missions whenever they wanted. Like GTA, players could walk around on foot or obtain a vehicle and roam at top speed. Those aren't the only things this game has in common with GTA either. Almost everything in the game has a shocking resemblance to Grand Theft Auto. Hell, even the HUD has a very similar layout. At the time that this game was released, these borrowed elements were blatant and kind of looked down upon. People didn't think too highly of games that so unapologetically took elements from other games. Now, however, these elements, like a small minimap in the corner of the screen, are present in basically every AAA release. This helps players today gain a level of familiarity with the gameplay, and those gripes about the blatant copying sort of fall to the wayside. Not everything is a direct copy of GTA either. This game has a surprising lack of violence when you take into consideration that it is copying one of the most violent franchises in gaming history. None of the characters you play as use weapons and simply kick to attack things. You never really kill anyone in the game, even when you make their vehicles explode.
My convertible!
The game kind of takes a, hey, it's a cartoon, they're fine approach to violence, which is refreshing for the open world genre. Hit and Run shows us that not every open world game needs to be dark and gritty, and they can actually approach the violence in these games with a sense of humor. When you commandeer a vehicle in Hit and Run, you simply jump into the passenger seat and you control the previous driver to get around. I honestly found this feature hilarious, but the game doesn't put too much emphasis on using pedestrian vehicles, and more often than not, if you have to use these vehicles, you're doing something wrong. Before I get too far into the gameplay though, I have to address the elephant in the room. This game is based on one of the most beloved and, for a time, funniest cartoons ever to appear on television. So how does this game compare? Is it really funny, or is it just a cringy attempt at humor that most games fail at? How has the humor aged? Can this game still even be funny? To answer all of these questions, I am happy to report that Hit and Run is still an absolute riot to play through. I was surprised at how much this game consistently made me laugh.
Sorry, Bot. I can't serve booze to a minor. It ain't right.
I'm here to buy fireworks.
Oh, hell yeah.
Most of the jokes are genuinely funny and stand up well even more than a decade later. This all makes sense when you consider the fact that the show's writers were completely on board throughout the development process. They penned the story, the jokes, and the characters, which makes it stand out as a true Simpsons property. Any huge Simpsons fan owes it to themselves to try this game out, as I would argue that it is 10 times funnier than the show's more recent seasons. I guess I should say here that I'm not the biggest Simpsons fan in the world. I mean, I used to watch the show with my parents. I think every kid did, especially if you grew up in the 90s. Basically, everybody was watching The Simpsons. I mean, there's a reason that it's the longest running cartoon ever, is because it was incredibly popular when it first started. I was definitely a part of the Simpsons craze. I loved this show for a long time. I remember for dinner watching new episodes with my parents and my brother. But over time, I kind of just fell out of love with it, which I feel like most people did. And it was simply just because it was running on for too long, and hell, it's still running. And people would argue that it's funny or not now, but I think that the show's main problem is that it just has a severe amount of fatigue. Something that this game kind of exists outside of. With that said though, I don't know like the deep Simpsons lore, I don't know all of the characters, I don't know all their names and stuff like that. It is familiar to me, but I'm not like the biggest Simpsons fan out there, so if you're expecting some sort of serious critique of how this game treats the license, well, you're not going to get anything that deep here. It was still great to be transported to a time where the Simpsons were the kings of comedy, and it was a delight to see that about 90% of the game's humor stands up to the test of time. Even when the dialogue or spoken jokes don't make you laugh, the sight gags consistently catch you off guard and show just how much detail is sprinkled in this game. I bet you're wondering, though, how the game's actual gameplay stands up today. Well, to be perfectly honest, it's kind of a mixed bag. The game takes place in 3 different open areas: Springfield, Downtown Springfield, and Squidport. Each of these levels is kind of like a large circuit that circles back into itself, which is nice and makes each level feel larger than it actually is. The driving is fine for the most part, aside from a few vehicles that control terribly. This can be slightly forgiven since the game gives each vehicle stats to determine their handling and whatnot, but it doesn't excuse the game's odd physics. This sucks for me because, to be perfectly honest, I'm not the best at racing games. My strategy in these games is always to put the pedal to the metal and not let up until I come in first. This is completely subjective because once again I suck at these games, but this is the one thing that eventually destroyed my enjoyment of the game over time. I loved the open world aspects and some of the platforming despite the game's terrible camera. I loved the story and the humor supporting it. I love the game's goofy music that changed depending on who you were playing. I love the fact that the voice cast is comprised of the original cast from the show.
Hi, Dr. Nick.
Hi, everybody.
Hell, I even love the look and feel of Springfield despite how dated the graphics have become. Oh, and did I mention that this game runs at 60 frames per second on the original Xbox? I couldn't believe it. It really is a testament to how polished this game is, especially when you compare it to other games that I've played on this show so far. But nothing can hide the fact that there are some big issues with this game too. Most of these issues don't start to crop up until you're about halfway into the game, but that is when you start to notice that this game has a very generic and boring pattern under its hood. After the first few levels, you start to realize that main missions fall under 4 categories: chase the vehicle, destroy the vehicle, collect the items, or drive to the point. The game's spins each of these around a little bit and may even mix them together, but none of the main missions deviate from this formula. There are side missions and races that you can do to mix things up, but even these get incredibly repetitive and unfair over time. This is my main gripe with the repetition in the game. You get tired of doing the same things over and over and over again, only with consistently less time to do them. The base gameplay is just barely fun enough to get you through the first few levels, and then it starts to really ride on you that you aren't really playing to have fun, but rather playing to finish the game. This leads me to a bit of a confession. I honestly didn't finish this game. I normally try to finish these games before I review them, especially finish them at least once, but here I just couldn't do it. I couldn't force myself. I wasn't having fun anymore. And to really pinpoint the exact moment in the game when that happened to me, I really just have to go through the story for you guys. The game starts with Homer being Homer. He's hungry and wants some soda and donuts. You notice that there are a lot of wasp cameras floating around Springfield that seem to be surprisingly fascinated by you, but you're hungry, damn it, and you don't worry about it too much. Eventually, though, even Homer starts to realize that something is going on and decides to investigate where the wasps are coming from. He notices black surveillance vans all around Springfield and follows them to the nuclear plant in Springfield. He concludes that Mr. Burns is behind it somehow and confronts him. Burns denies these accusations and promptly sicks his dogs on Homer. Next you play as Bart, who is skipping school in order to get his hands on the new incredibly violent game Bone Storm 2. The missions take you all over downtown Springfield, where you meet a ton of familiar faces from the show.
Mo, do you have any human blood?
Nah, what about goat blood?
Sure, why not?
This was honestly my favorite section of the game because downtown Springfield felt surprisingly bustling with life. It's amazing to me how a game from 2003 can make a city feel alive, but a modern-day AAA title can't convince me of hardly anything. Anyway, Bart can't seem to find a copy of the game anywhere around town. He eventually figures out that this is because Professor Fink bought all of them to program his incredibly violent giant robot, Truckosaurus. Bart is immediately on board with this and does what he can to help the professor. After the Truckosaurus is complete, though, Bart is abducted by aliens and disappears. This is when the game shifts to Lisa and the Squidport level of the game. This is the game's most open-feeling level since it has various different environments and areas to explore. Lisa is on a mission to find her brother Bart, who has gone missing even though no one really seems to care all that much. This is where the game first starts to drag, having you do seemingly pointless tasks with very little progress being made. You do eventually find Bart, but the missions leading up to him were so frustrating that it barely makes it worth it. This is where the game's problem of giving you impossible time limits in missions starts to rear its ugly head. I must have gone through each of these missions at least 3 times before I completed them because the game required you to have a near perfect run every time. Every little mistake you make is completely unforgiven at this point in the game, and you're better off just starting each mission over if you make one. It only gets worse from here on out too. Once Bart is found, you play as Marge. She believes that there is something deeper going on with Bart and believes it has something to do with the new Buzz Cola coming to town. She ultimately discovers that aliens are using the cola to turn the people of Springfield insane. She tells Apu this in the Quickie Mart, and he becomes remorseful for selling the soda to so many people. You then play as Apu and try to round up as much soda around the city as possible and discover what the aliens are trying to do with the insane civilians, and this is where I stopped playing. If you didn't notice, I've stopped talking about the gameplay of each of these levels at this point. That is mostly due to the fact that the gameplay has gotten so dry that I'm just not having fun at all and honestly forgot what each level consists of. I know it's my job as a reviewer to get a thorough look at every game that I review, and for that I'm sorry, but I just couldn't take it anymore. I didn't want my unenjoyment and frustration with the game to tarnish my overall opinion of it, which, by the way, is something I fear has happened already in this series. I'm not going to force myself through a game if I know for a fact I've seen everything it has to offer. Yes, I didn't finish the story, but I can look up the game's final moments on YouTube without having to grind mindlessly in order to earn them for myself. And honestly, I'm not going to say the game's ending here in order to encourage you guys to either play it yourself or look it up on your own. The twist in the game is something that has admittedly been done before, ironically by South Park a few months prior to the game's release, but it is still well done in my opinion. It has that Simpsons flair to it, and if you're a huge Simpsons fan, I think you'll enjoy it and should seek it out. And the same goes for the game as a whole. If you're a big, huge Simpsons fan, you're probably gonna love this. It's kind of like South Park The Stick of Truth, where if you're a huge South Park fan, you're really gonna enjoy that game because it comes from the writers. It's coming from the people who created it, so it's coming from the people who know the license best. That same level of respect and dedication to the property is present here. Now, you can find copies of this game online, physical copies, of course, but they kind of run pretty steep. I was actually surprised that the used versions of these games on Amazon run for about $40. I mean, that might just be Amazon recommending the more expensive price, but that's actually really surprising, considering this game was as widespread as many would argue. The reason this game is so expensive is probably just because it's a nostalgia bomb for a lot of people. I mean, I was one of those people. When this game came out back in 2003, I wasn't allowed to play GTA or Vice City or any of those games because my parents thought they were too violent. I mean, and rightfully so. They are way too violent for kids to play. So hit and run was kind of like my only way to get that open world kind of gameplay back in these days. And so I kind of treated this game as my GTA. So people who were older than me, able to play GTA, will look back at the old GTA games with the same sort of nostalgia that I look back at this game with. And I think that's the case for a lot of people, to be perfectly honest, and that's probably why it's so expensive. I also, once again, couldn't find any versions of this game on Steam or GOG, so I don't know, your mileage may vary if you want to find a digital version of this game. It might not have to be legitimate, but once again, as I always say, that's up to you guys. I'm not going to do it. You guys go for it. If you do happen to find yourself with a copy though, I can only recommend playing this game as slowly as possible. Don't actively seek out missions, and instead just roam around and absorb the scenery. You'll save yourself a lot of frustration if you just complete the game at a casual pace and don't worry too much about completing it. This game is definitely all about the journey rather than the destination. At the end of the day, I was happy that I took the time to go back and try this game out. Sure, it isn't perfect, but everything this game does right somehow makes up for its pitfalls. For years, I considered this one of the best licensed games ever, up there with Chronicles of Riddick and the more recent South Park Stick of Truth. And while now my view of the games might be slightly tarnished, it's refreshing to know that despite the game's problems, it still stands out as a love letter to the property and an example of a respectful licensed game. Not all licensed games suck. It can be done right if given the right amount of attention and care. Thank God for games like this, Riddick, and Stick of Truth that help prove that fact. All of the other games I've played so far on this show have been plagued with issues due to running out of development time. It's nice to finally be playing a game that is so fully realized it has a ton of character because of it. It's also nice to go back to a game that you see as nostalgic, only to realize that it is still a great game without those rose-tinted glasses. Thank you, Simpsons Hit and Run, for being so damn awesome.
When will they learn? Video games don't kill people, they just kill their minds.
Alright guys, that is the end of the video. Thank you for watching this far into it. So some exciting things are happening with the channel. We're growing quite a bit. If you guys joined on with our channel after the whole Mass Effect kerfuffle, thank you so much for supporting us. Thank you for showing that we do have an audience, that we do have people watching our content. It's really helping us out. If you haven't seen our videos before and this is your first one, you should subscribe because we have a lot more videos like this. If you didn't like this, maybe check out one of my other Obscurity reviews because I've looked at games that are much more obscure than this one. I'm gonna go really obscure for the next one. At least it's a game that I know nobody talks about. I've seen it on Reddit maybe like once in the past like 2 months mentioned. Which is kind of unfortunate because every time I plan to do one of these damn videos, somebody brings it up in a fucking Reddit thread. Yeah, so stay tuned for that. I also have another series that I'm going to start with these Obscurity reviews. I'm going to start doing gameplays with them. Stay tuned for that. I'm going to start doing that with the next game. Also, we have some more gameplay with the other guys coming up with Connor, Brandon, Matt, and all of them. So, yeah, thank you guys for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. Bye!